Remember when old Swampy Joe was able to win the Democratic nomination and the presidency from his basement? He was able to pretend to anyone when he did pop up from the basement that he was normal, a new normal, a return to civility, a return to when politics was normal and boring. Nothing crazy was going to happen.
Do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? Really?
Now, he continued this line and it worked, particularly with suburban women. It worked with independents in the United States. But remember what AOC and the left said of his particular candidacy, that they would pull him left once he eventually won the presidency, because the most important thing was Orange Man bad. Well, lefties, of course, well and truly embraced the Biden agenda, a Biden agenda that at one point was going to look at pumping an extra $10 trillion into the American economy. He wasn't able to spend all of that, but he spent a lot of it, and inflation went through the roof. There are big problems with what's happening in the United States right now. And just have a look at the poll numbers of the bloke who pretended to be middle of the road, but then started to turn out to either be a lefty himself or somebody who just wouldn't fight the lefties that were around him. Exactly the opposite happened to his fortunes. They will receive a major rebuke in November at the midterms, and most likely anyone but Trump would be guaranteed to win in 2024. Now, the truth, of course, about Joe Biden is that 81 million people didn't vote for him, but sure, 81 million people voted against Donald Trump. Whether the same numbers would turn up, well, we'll have to wait and see. But of course, we have a scenario about Bidenism being played out here in Australia, with each way Albo, who until very recently was more than willing to associate himself with some of the most left-wing figures in politics in the Western world. Remember when he went to the UK, posed for photos and gleefully was a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn in the United Kingdom? Well, of course, that was the real Albo. The one that is being presented at this election is, well, the Albo Biden plan, which is to pretend that you're the middle of the road man. It's why you're able to get people to write front pages like this that still to this day haunt him on the left. But don't worry, I'm Aussie Joe. I'm going to be not woke. But just like Biden, if you actually pay attention to what's being said before the election, you know that he's going to be more than woke. This is going to be the Biden administration coming to Australia, and it will be just as unsuccessful. Let me explain why. At a time when China is on the march economically and militarily around the world, what did Anthony Albanese say just this year about the priorities of the relationship that he would have with Joe Biden? Well, it'd all be about climate change. When he gave a national defence speech, he mentioned climate change more than he mentioned China, and about a dozen times more than he mentioned Russia or Ukraine.
Action on climate change. Climate change. Climate emergency. Climate change on climate change. The implications of climate change to combat climate change. Acting on climate change. Action on climate.
And it extends to the recent events in the Solomon Islands, where China and its fistful of dollars is buying off Pacific nations. Now, the view on the left is that because we've cut on foreign aid, that's how China's able to do it. The reality is, of course, China would pay double whatever we were paying. But most recently, this weekend, Peter Dutton was forced to have a whack at Anthony Albanese because he claimed climate change was a big part of what was happening in the Solomon Islands. Oh, but he's definitely not woke. They're also telling us up front that rather than just doing the right thing by all people, we would have a gendered lens put on every single decision that would happen in the cabinet table. They would have gender impact assessments for every single policy that would be discussed at cabinet, rather than just what's good for the country. Now, are there inequalities that need to be dealt with? You betcha. But the idea that every single decision that will be made by a cabinet, including Christina Keneally and Penny Wong, is somehow going to have gender as equal a part of it as balancing the budget or fixing aged care? And then, of course, there's the garbage that he's been pushing for the past little while, again, trying to pull a Biden here, that when he got to govern, he would be able to govern like Hawke and bring everyone together. And I don't know why he wants to even pretend to be John Howard. But here is the actual reality of the policies that he has put forward before the election. Now, while their main electoral strategy is I'm not Scott Morrison, the 45% emissions target, which would have had 11 years to be put in place, has now been magically replaced by 43% in just 8 years. It shortens climate policy with modelling that says 600,000 new jobs, but the actual modelling, if you actually read it, says only 64,000 jobs maybe in the building phase. The rest of it apparently comes from cutting of power prices of $275 by 2025, and that's just for the house. He says he wants to spend billions of dollars on brand new infrastructure for schools. Well, how did that go when Julia Gillard put that in place? And as they celebrated today, the blokes who helped Wayne Swan stuff the country are now the ones who will be in the driver's seat of our economy. Not to mention, of course, that Christina Keneally apparently may be moved to a senior financial portfolio, but they won't tell us till after the election. So Shorten's climate policy, Gillard's BER, and Rudd's money men, they're so proud of this, they actually toured that very point when the millionaire from the eastern suburbs is being dropped back onto the people of Parramatta because he once went to school in Dundas. Rudd's economic boys reunite for Albanese. And then there's the actual question about what are they willing to tell us up front. You see, there's only two ways to balance the budget. There's only two ways to do things better than if you believe everything is terrible about this government. Now remember, they're going to pass everything in this budget, so every dollar of spending they endorse. So does that mean more spending? Well, the only way, therefore, to do anything about debt and deficit, if they apparently care, which they don't, is to raise taxes. And we're somehow magically told that cutting government waste and multinationals will magically fix the Australian budget. Until, of course, he came up against this questioning from, of all people, the bloke whose profile on 60 Minutes looked like it was paid for by the Labor Party.
But you won't increase taxes.
Yeah, we've made it very clear. We have all of our policies out there for all to see.
Will you be increasing taxes?
We will be announcing our measure on multinational tax evasion.
He's pulling a Biden before your very eyes. And thankfully, while that was successful in the United States, we can see how unsuccessful the reality of BSing to the electorate actually is. And then there's this promise about fixing aged care. Now, not a person at a barbecue around the country doesn't want aged care to be better. And I agree with the ideas that the private companies that screw over old people in aged care should go to jail if they are found to have deliberately cut costs that end up hurting people. I have no problem with that. But the salesmanship was very dodgy. You see, in the speech that everyone saw on Thursday night, there wasn't a single number in the so-called budget in reply. He never said how much was going to be spent. Instead, that was briefed out to the media, that it would be $2.5 billion problem solved. Well, here's the asterisk. It's over 4 years. So the reality, does anyone truly believe you can fix the entire aged care system with just $500 million a year for the next 4 years? No. Just the same as you can't rewire the entire electrical system to deal with renewable energy with just $20 billion over 10 years when the actual cost is $1 trillion. You can't rebuild the entire NBN when your policy at best will fix 1.5 million houses. I get it. He's trying to win an election. But make no mistake, he's trying to pull a Biden. When he was asked today on Channel 9 about nurses for aged care, when one would be in every home 24 hours a day, where would they come from?
Aged care, you're saying that you'll have a nurse in every nursing home 24/7. How many nurses would you need to find?
Well, what we do is follow the recommendation of the Royal Commission. And the question is this, Chris. Don't you think that Australians wonder why there isn't a nurse in every nursing home 24/7?
Certainly, but they might also wonder where you'll get nurses
It's just
from.
common sense. Well, part of our policies that were out there as well is to increase education and training. We have 20,000 additional university places in areas of skill shortage. One of those is, of course, in nursing. We have 465,000 fee-free TAFE places. Many of those areas and areas of the care economy.
Do you know how many nurses you'll need in order to deliver that, just that one promise?
Look, the sector will grow.
What? This bloke thinks that he's running for a spot in the movie The Castle, where somehow the vibe will be enough to change the course of the country. Now, it might be. We'll get another opinion poll tonight. We'll see what happens. But last time I checked, Australians are a little more complicated than just the vibe. And it was funny, but it was in a movie. It's not an actual argument that you put before the High Court. Same as a budget and reply speech actually has to have some dollar values placed inside it, not leaked out to journalists who can't be bothered to ask, is this all at once? And thank goodness for people like Chris Ullman and Ali Langdon who are actually asking the questions that he expects never to be asked because he doesn't have an answer for them. And don't forget about his judgment. Remember, the people that will actually be running the government, just like Kamala Harris with Joe Biden, well, it's going to be the mean girls. Because, of course, Penny Wong cannot possibly be questioned about anything she does in the Senate or foreign relations. Then, of course, there's Katie Gallagher, who thought, as the Shadow Finance Minister, that she found a massive $3 billion hole in the federal budget. It turns out it was just the difference between announcements that had, decisions that had been announced versus not announced. And don't get me started on KK. But then, of course, when their bullying behaviour was exposed, he sided with the mean girls.
I find it astonishing that in 2022, I get a question using the term mean girls. I find that extraordinarily disrespectful to describe strong, articulate, principled women like Penny Wong, Katie Gallagher and Christina Keneally.
He's pulling a Biden. Thankfully, we don't have to be America. Don't fall for it. Now, about the fake independence. As you know, of course, there are these cashed up parts of Australia that will try to tell working class Australia how they should vote forever. Essentially, it's people who don't have the balls to go full green, but are going to pretend to go kind of green with these fake independents backed in by that Climate 200 mob. But interestingly, as you know, the whole game here is about getting these people to firstly reduce the number of seats the Liberal Party can win, but then, God forbid, if the Liberal Party needed any of their support to form government after the election in a minority, they would all, of course, not vote for the Liberal Party. They would, of course, put the Labor Party in. But just this week, Climate 200 started to take out some insurance, just in case their dream team doesn't make it to Canberra. They're throwing money in the way of existing independents, hoping that their vote, if it came down to it, would be a vote for Albo. Look who popped up this week as two candidates being supported by Climate 200 on their website. Andrew Wilkie, current independent MP with a chance to decide who would form government after the next election. Rebecca Sharkey, current independent who would have a chance to decide who would vote after the election. And as we know, bullying is the word that if you can throw it in anyone's direction, it will apparently stick, unless, of course, it's anyone on the Labor side, and then nothing to see here. The term is offensive. I find the term mean girls offensive. What about this crap that was being served up in the Union Superannuation News website about bullying in Canberra and the fake independents? This is garbage. Have a look. Crossbenchers Zali Steggall, Rebecca Sharkey and Helen Haynes were the latest to make claims as to Mr Morrison's conduct on Thursday, saying he disrespected them during Parliament by turning his back and showing his disinterest by using his mobile phone while his opponents were addressing the House. Dear God! Now, I know that there were a lot of tea towels sold when Julia Gillard had a crack at Tony Abbott for looking at his watch. But is this really the standard at which you can get multiple days of news coverage out of? Well, of course, when it's all about trying to build the vibe, when it's all about trying to help Albo pull a Biden, when it's all about pretending I'm not woke, but the mean girls are so powerful you can't even criticise them for their own behaviour. And then, of course, there's Zali Steggall, who is, yes, currently part of the Parliament and most likely will sail through again. The Liberal Party really screwed up with a chance to knock her out in Warringah. Well, she says that she's more likely to support the Liberal Party if it came down to a decision of who should govern the country, just as long as Scott Morrison isn't the Prime Minister. Let me read the guff and I'll tell you what the translation is. Ms Steggall pointed to deep concerns within my community about some things that have occurred in Parliament recently. What, like checking phones and turning backs? Oh no! Whether a different leader would help her back the coalition, she replied, that is obviously an open possibility. Translation? Labor. The fake independents will either try to get it through new candidates or they'll get it by buying off the Climate 200, the ones that are already there. Again, it's up to you. Don't fall for it. Share this video amongst your friends. All of this is their own words, not mine. A couple of other things before we get to a crackerjack panel here this evening. I get their bold predictions for the week ahead. We will learn this week whether the person accused of the sexual assault of Brittany Higgins will have their entire trial called off forever, or whether it will move to the next phase. Wait and watch this space due to the excessive amount of public commentary that has happened from the day we first learnt about Brittany Higgins' name all the way up until when somebody was charged. Secondly, for those of you who hate coal, I'm sorry to tell you this, but guess what? $100 billion worth of coal exports have made their way out of the country. That's how you're able to fund police, hospitals and aged care changes. Oh, and Will Smith has resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Does he have to give his Oscar back? No. And just quickly, by the way, about Russia, there are some very early signs that something big might be happening and the unthinkable might be about to happen here. Apparently, there are some reports about Russian troops and tanks moving away from Kyiv. Now, whether they're doing this to come back and hit harder, whether they're doing this to turn back east and then down south to try and take over the ports, who knows? But it could be the beginning of the final stages of the war. I hope that's the case. I hope diplomacy ends up winning out here, but we'll wait, watch and see about the next couple of days. But just one last thing about Joe Biden, and this has nothing to do with Albo. As you remember, when he went to Europe, he was full of, he'd had his angry pills that day, he'd had a big nap and he was ready to channel Ronald Reagan.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Now, of course, this was walked back by the White House where they said they weren't doing anything about regime change. So let's imagine, for whatever reason, the old man got put out to pasture. Well, who would be the President of the United States? Our old mate Kamala Harris. Now, I'll save you the full, excruciating 2.5-minute version of this answer, but when asked, do you agree with the President? She offered this word salad.
Been to Poland. I was in Romania. I've been to Europe, I think, probably at least 3 times in the last 4 months. I was in Munich, Germany, where I gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference. I was in France before that, speaking with heads of state about this issue, among many other issues, but most recently about this issue. And I will tell you, in sitting down with prime ministers and presidents, often the first thing they would say to me is thank you to the United States and this administration for bringing us together, for building the coalition, for reinvigorating the relationship between the United States and its NATO allies, reinvigorating the relationship and the importance of the relationship to the EU in terms of an issue like Ukraine, which is ultimately about one of the most important principles that we are fighting for, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Now spells Zelensky. Let's compare and contrast that with Donald Trump, who did this at a rally just last night.
The more America's moms and dads must be given a veto over anyone teaching far-left gender theories to their children in school without parental consent. It's unbelievable.
America, what a shit show.